Dateline Mystery.
Known whereabouts may hold the clues to what happened to him. Braden Fuchsa vanishes in summer 2009.
It was just so out of character.
His parents panic when they discover a missing handgun.
My heart just sank.
And a puzzling trail of clues that he's left in his wake.
We didn't know if he hit north, south, east, or west.
Authorities discover that this young man has been guarding a dark secret.
Braden was pretty freaked out about having spent a night in jail.
And the search for him turns into a manhunt 700 miles away.
At this point, they would probably be looking for a body.
It's July 2009. 22-year-old Braden Fuchsa is enjoying summer on his own. He's just moved out of his parents' house into an apartment in the college town of Lawrence, Kansas.
Braden was really dead set that he wanted to be out on his own. He had the opportunity to move in with a individual he went to school with. They had found him an apartment, and they were going to move in together.
It was a big deal for me for him to leave home, but he wanted to be independent, which we encourage. I mean, you have to let him go at some point.
Braden still sees his parents often, visiting them at home in Olathe, just 20 miles east of Lawrence.
He'd come over to eat and he'd come over to get leftovers. Todd likes to grill, and so that was Braden's big thing, was to grill, and he would come over and they would trade cooking secrets and recipes.
Braden also stops by regularly on his way to and from work. He's a security guard at a large outdoor retailer in Olathe, not far from his parents' house.
He said his dream job would be to work at Bass Pro, so he could be around the fishing rods and the guns and everything.
When he's not at work, Braden spends almost all his time doing outdoor activities.
Braden, from the get-go, enjoyed the outdoors. We boated, we skied and tubed and wakeboard. Every free moment that we had, we were fishing. He was an outdoors person, 100%.
He's been camping since he can remember, since he was a toddler.
What is that? Did you catch him?
He loved to fish, and he loved to hunt.
Braden has an especially strong affinity for mountains, which was apparent on a family trip to Colorado in 2007.
He had more fun that week. He was constantly, oh, let's stop and do this, and let's stop. You know, we were hiking, and I mean, he was just beside himself.
In mid-July 2009, Braden's parents are out of town for a couple days. When they get back home Wednesday the 15th, Starla contacts Braden.
I text him because he knew we had been out of town and told him that we were home, we had made it okay.
Starla exchanges several texts with her son. She tells him that she and Todd have plans to see a film that night.
I told him I hated to cut our time short, but I had to go because the movie was going to start, and I'd talk to him later.
Starla and Todd spend the evening relaxing at the movies. But when they get home, they notice something odd.
Todd had gotten on the computer and was looking, and he said, Braden transferred some money.
It's not a big deal. It's usually one of the type of situations where Braden or a daughter would call and say, I'm short on money, I don't get paid till Friday, can you float me some money? And it happened all the time.
But this time, the amount that Braden has transferred is much higher than usual.
It was $800. Usually we're talking $300, $400. Just enough to pay his portion of the rent or insurance being due or something like that. I made a phone call to him and got his voicemail, left him a message just asking him, what's up, were you in trouble, and you had enough money.
Starla and Todd go to bed feeling curious, but not overly worried about the transfer. They figure their son will give them an explanation in the morning. But the next day, Braden doesn't call.
Thursday came around, still hadn't heard from him, and it wasn't like Braden. Starla and him were very close. They text back and forth daily.
Then, another day passes without word from Braden. His parents spend the rest of the week searching for him, making a routine of calling regularly and driving by his apartment and work to look for him.
We didn't know what was going on. We just bound and determined we were going to keep up the ritual of, going to his hangout and try to find him.
Although Braden's parents are very worried, they don't call the police, wanting to respect their son's newfound independence. But they do reach out to his friends, including his ex-girlfriend, Elena Ryan. The young couple dated for almost 4 years, breaking up only a year and a half earlier.
I spoke with Starla and told her that I had seen Braden at a gas station in town. But it was a very brief interaction, just kind of a hi, how you doing sort of thing. He didn't seem overly eager to talk to me. And because he had been trying to pursue a reconciliation prior to that, that seems a little strange.
Elena's encounter with Braden is only hours before Starla's last text with her son on Wednesday, July 15th. His parents' concern grows.
I mean, you can imagine the worry. We were both a wreck.
It's been 4 full days since Starla and Todd have heard from their son. They're at a loss as to what to do next when they have a sudden suspicion.
For some reason, on Sunday morning, we got up, and it was just one of those feelings.
In our master bedroom closet, there's a shelf in there.
We kept a 9mm in the closet for protection. Our granddaughter had been there 2 weeks before, and I had put it up high in the closet so that she could not get it. So I had just seen it the week before when I'd went and checked on it.
So I seen the gun case there up on the shelf, and I don't know why I did it, but I just grabbed a hold of the gun case itself. It was empty, and my heart just sank.
Only family members know where the gun is kept. Todd and Starla are sure that Braden has taken it.
The gun was gone, and we've become very nervous, and Todd said, we're going to file a police report now.
The search for Braden takes on a new urgency. Where did he go? And why does he need a gun?
It's the worst feeling in the world. Our stomachs just dropped.
Coming up, Braden's parents are prevented from filing a missing persons report for their son.
Our emotions were extremely high at that point. We didn't know what else to do.
Todd and Starla Fuchsa have not seen or heard from their 22-year-old son Braden in 4 days, despite repeatedly trying to contact him. But the alarms really go off when a handgun goes missing from their home.
The minute we discovered the gun was missing, we went straight to the police.
But at the Olathe Police Department, the Fuchsas are not permitted to file a missing persons report for Braden because he is over 21 and no longer living at home.
Our problem was he was an adult. He's still our child, but they don't see it that way.
They actually told us since he was living in Lawrence with a roommate, the roommate would need to be the one that submitted the report.
And it was kind of frustrating because our emotions were extremely high at that point. We didn't know what else to do.
Just in conversation, I mentioned that, well, he's got my pistol. That changed the whole subject. They automatically took our report and filed it.
Braden's parents give police a detailed description of their son, his vehicle, and the handgun. Detective Kenton Thompson is put on the case.
I reviewed the report that we had this missing 22-year-old man, and that he basically had just disappeared. We've got the handgun gone from his parents' house. So obviously now we've got this concern of what's that about.
As Detective Thompson begins his investigation, Braden's parents go home and wait. But they can't stop thinking about the gun.
You don't know if he was going to hurt himself, if something went wrong and he was protecting himself, if something had happened to him and somebody was after him. You just don't know.
Braden's parents are confident that their son is an experienced gun user.
He's been using a gun since he was big enough to walk. He was hunting by the time he was 5.
But they also know that the gun that Braden took from their house is not meant for hunting.
A lot of police carry 9mm. It's more for target shooting, and it's more of a protection gun than anything.
Braden's former girlfriend Elena is mystified as well.
Braden had his own guns. He had his own handgun. I know he had one in Lawrence. Why would he take his dad's handgun instead of his own?
Looking for information, Braden's parents try calling the last people to have contact with their son.
Braden's cell phone was part of our account, so I had access to his records.
And we took like the last 20 numbers, and he texts them.
You know, this is Braden's dad. Haven't seen Braden in a little while. Can you please call me?
At first, no one responds. But slowly, calls start coming in, including one from Braden's roommate.
He called, and him and I visited a little bit, and he did not know where Braden had gone.
But his roommate does know something else.
We found out that on Wednesday, Braden grabbed his bag and told his roommate that he was coming over to Olathe to spend the night with Todd and I, with his parents.
But Braden's parents were home on Wednesday night, and Braden never showed up.
To say that he was coming to our house was nothing big, and the roommate wouldn't have checked it out. We wouldn't have thought anything about it.
Given Braden's lie, his parents tried to pin down their son's actual movements.
We knew he had been at our house at some time because the gun was missing. We have the neighbors across the street, and we went over and asked them if they had seen Braden, and they said yes, they had seen him at the house that morning and said he was there about 15 minutes or so. He had pulled in, waved to him, you know, hollered hi, went into the house, and come back out and waved to him again and got in his car and left. So that was about 10:30, 10:40.
It was later that same day that Starla last texted with Braden. His cell phone bill indicates that Braden didn't call or text anyone else after that point.
I had talked to him at 2:30, so that kind of gave us a timeline of what he was doing.
As Braden's parents try to put all the pieces together, another clue surfaces. Todd receives a call from Megan Loach, who, unknown to his parents, is Braden's new girlfriend.
I met Braden at a party in Lawrence at the end of May 2009. Braden is really funny. He's the center of anything. Everybody who was at the party was there for Braden. Everybody knew Braden, and he made me laugh. I instantly liked Braden, and I think he instantly liked me.
Megan and Braden have only been dating for 2 months. But she feels close enough to him that she is disturbed by his behavior the last time they meet, the night before he disappears.
He spent the night at my house. We made dinner and we were hanging out. Braden was just really upset and just not his normal self. Braden's really outgoing and he's always making people laugh, and it was weird to see him just worried. He just looked worried.
The next morning, Wednesday, the day he disappears, Braden leaves abruptly.
I think it was about mid-morning. Braden got up and left, and he usually doesn't leave without saying goodbye or something, or he usually hangs around. And then I had heard a car start in the parking lot. So I looked out my window and he was pulling out. So I texted him and said no goodbye or not saying goodbye anymore or something. Braden just texted me back and said goodbye, Megan. That was it. That was the last time I had talked to him.
4 days later, no one, including his parents, has heard from Braden. And the next phone call sends the Fuchsas even deeper down the rabbit hole.
Later that afternoon, we got a phone call from the police department. They had located his vehicle in Douglas, Wyoming area.
Coming up, Braden has been hiding a dark secret from his family.
We would never have suspected that something like this was going on, ever. It was almost like a Twilight Zone moment.
On July 15th, 2009, Braden Fuchsa leaves his home in Lawrence, Kansas. His whereabouts are completely unknown by his friends and family. Then, 4 days later, police report that his vehicle has been found in Wyoming.
What is in Wyoming? He knew no one in Wyoming, and why is he going that direction? What was causing him to go there? We were just a little dumbfounded, to be honest. There was a lot going through our minds.
Wyoming Highway Patrol found the vehicle as an abandoned vehicle. They did a check on it at 10:44 a.m. on Thursday, July 16th. There's no one around it. Now, at that point, Braden had not been reported missing, so they left because they had no other information available to them.
3 days later, on Sunday, July 19th, Braden's parents file the missing persons report. It's only then that Braden's information is entered into the National Crime Information Center database and made available to authorities across the country.
We got what's called a delayed entry hit off of that tag, which told us that back on the 16th, that tag was run by the Wyoming Highway Patrol.
Braden's parents tell the police that as far as they are aware, their son doesn't know anyone in Wyoming, nor has he ever been there. The development in the case makes them very uneasy.
I mean, there's just so many missing pieces to this whole thing. The more information that kept coming up, the more confused we got, and it was just so out of character.
Looking for answers, Detective Thompson contacts many of the same people that Braden's parents have spoken to. He agrees that something seems very wrong.
I work a lot of juvenile cases, and typically the first people I talk to is their girlfriend or their boyfriend and their best friend. Those two people. If anyone's going to have information, usually have some idea of what has happened. And in this case, his roommate was his best friend, and he has no information. And Megan was completely surprised by it also.
Braden's former longtime girlfriend, Elena, isn't surprised that he didn't confide in anyone.
From my perspective, Braden didn't have a lot of close friends. He was a sweet guy, but he was very quiet. I don't know if I would call him shy, but he was just very quiet and didn't put himself out there.
But Braden's new girlfriend has a differing account of his character.
Braden was a very outgoing person. I'm kind of shy, so Braden definitely had to be more outgoing to get me kind of out of my shell. It's weird hearing about someone that you were so close to in a situation that you never expected. It started to become more like I never really knew Braden.
As Detective Thompson struggles to get some insight into Braden's actions, a possible motive emerges. Braden is facing potential prison time on a theft charge.
The theft charge resulted from Braden stealing some cash from his employer. It was a felony level theft, which means in Kansas it was over $1,000.
Braden's parents were not told of their son's arrest when they filed the missing persons report. When police call to notify them, they're stunned.
We were very shocked. He'd never been in trouble ever. I don't know if he'd ever even had a speeding ticket. He was not that kind of kid.
Braden is a straight, go-forward kid. And when he was in trouble, his mom usually knew about it. He would confess. So, you know, just anything to happen like that was just, it didn't happen with Braden.
But as Braden's parents think back to their son's behavior, the recent transfer from their account, as well as some earlier events, they begin to recognize signs of his growing money problems.
Towards the midsummer time frame, Bass Pro had cut his department to a limited amount of hours and left him with 8 hours for the entire week.
Still, Braden manages to keep his true financial state under wraps.
Braden reinforced us that he had enough side jobs that he was getting by.
But in reality, Braden's financial troubles are quickly catching up with him.
His roommate told me in June, Braden was late getting his share of the rent to him. He didn't think a whole lot about that at the time. But then in July, he was late again and you know, like a week late.
As Braden's parents later learn, their son is so desperate for money that a week before he disappears, he dips into the till at work and gets caught.
Braden worked in security at Bass Pro. So his job was transferring money back and forth at closing time, putting stuff in the safe. The way we understand is they were closing up. Braden had taken money from the registers to the lockup spot. They confronted Braden when he come into work the next day. Braden said, yeah, it's back at my apartment. They brought in the police, talked to him a while. He confessed everything, and the police actually took him back to Lawrence to pick up the money. It's my understanding that he returned nearly all of the money. I don't think quite all of it, but nearly all of the money.
Despite his cooperation with the law, Braden is immediately taken into custody.
After that initial report was made, he was arrested. He was taken directly to the Johnson County Adult Detention Center.
Braden spends the night in jail. He is released the next day, but according to Braden's roommate, the harrowing experience of being locked up stays with him.
Braden was, quote, pretty freaked out about having spent the night in jail. Being arrested, you know, for him was a pretty major life event and was distressing for him.
Braden was scared. I think when he got arrested, they had exaggerated how much trouble he was in, and I think that Braden he's never been in trouble before, and he was just really frightened by that. And he thought he was going to go to jail for, you know, a couple of years.
Braden is due in court for a preliminary hearing on July 16th. But as the date approaches, Braden appears to set a plan in motion.
When he left his apartment on the 15th, he told his roommate, I'm going to go spend the night with my parents in Olathe. Okay? That was Wednesday night. He had court the next day. Well, that is actually when he left.
When his case is called the next morning, Braden's car is already 2 states away, in Wyoming. Braden is nowhere to be found. All signs point to his being a fugitive from the law, but no one saw it coming.
We would never have suspected that something like this was going on, ever, because we've always had such an open relationship with our kids. It was almost like a Twilight Zone moment. It's like, what is this? I don't understand.
From his conversations with friends and family, Detective Thompson paints a portrait of what he believes to be Braden's last days in Kansas. A young man, ashamed of his crime and extremely afraid of getting a harsh sentence, panics and flees.
I believe his perception of it was that it was going to be much more serious for him than it probably would have been. This was the lowest level that would qualify as a felony theft. He didn't have any criminal history, so this would not have been a potentially serious sentence. It wasn't going to involve a prison term or anything like that. If he truly understood the likely outcome, perhaps he would not have been so distraught about the arrest.
Myself, my wife, the detective have all called and left voicemails on his phone saying that come back, hit your court date. This is not as bad as you think.
While there now seems to be strong motive for Braden's sudden bolt from Kansas, his exact whereabouts are still a mystery. Is Braden running from the law and carrying a handgun? Or has something much worse happened to him? Coming up, as more details come to light, investigators make a devastating discovery.
We only missed having some contact with him by an hour or maybe an hour and 15 minutes.
Get more Disappeared online at investigation.discovery.com. After being arrested for a felony-level theft, Braden Fuchsa flees his home state of Kansas. On the day he is due in court for a preliminary hearing, his car turns up 700 miles away in Wyoming. But Braden is nowhere to be found. As the details of Braden's case emerge, the investigation focuses on the largest piece of evidence, Braden's car.
When the Highway Patrol found the vehicle, Braden was not present.
And then we got a call that they had went ahead and opened it. Nothing looked suspicious in it whatsoever.
The Wyoming Highway Patrol tows the vehicle to Douglas, a small town just north of where it was found. Braden's parents make the long drive to pick it up themselves.
Starla and I left early Friday morning and drove the entire route to Douglas.
I think the drive to get there was about 13 hours. It was a very long drive. You're very anxious because you're scared of what you're going to find once you get there. It was a very emotional trip.
As Braden's parents make their way to Douglas, they retrace the journey they believe their son made 10 days earlier.
From Cheyenne north to Douglas, the population is hardly any. You go through some very small towns along the way. The houses are far and few between. It's got the hills and very pretty country.
As they drive through the changing landscape, they look for physical cues that would indicate why Braden chose this direction.
We don't really understand why that area, even though it's absolutely beautiful. There were the plains there, it's just gorgeous, but that's not what he's always wanted. I mean, he's always wanted the mountains. So the area that we found the car, it just doesn't coincide with what we know that he wanted.
It's late at night by the time the Fuchsas arrive in Douglas. The next morning, they go directly to the tow yard to pick up Braden's car.
This is something that's kind of bothered me. There was a key code on the door, a lock, and Braden always used that. He always stuck his keys under the floor mat. That was his habit, and I looked under the floor mat and the keys were there. That just, in my eyes, tells me he locked his vehicle and walked away.
As Starla and Todd continue to look through their son's belongings, the more convinced they are that Braden willingly left his car behind.
The clothes looked like he had went through the bag, kind of trying to sort out what he was going to take and what he wasn't going to take.
Because Braden has so recently moved out of his parents' home, Starla and Todd have a good idea of what items he might be carrying with him.
His cell phone was missing and he took his wallet. The boots were gone. There was a pair of jeans, so that tells me that he had one pair of jeans, the pair he was wearing, the boots, maybe a couple t-shirts, and the gun was missing.
But why Braden abandoned his car baffles detectives. Was he trying to throw off police, or did he leave his car by the side of the highway in the hopes that it would be found?
I quite honestly just cannot make sense of that. I don't know why he would abandon that vehicle that way where he did, because you certainly know it's going to be found. I mean, that's probably the easiest place to find a vehicle. You leave alongside the interstate, you know the highway patrol is going to come by and stop and check on it.
Upon their return to Kansas, the Fuchses hand over to the Olathe police several items they found in the car. One of them leads Detective Thompson to a key witness.
It was a receipt from a tire repair place out of Wheatland, Wyoming. That receipt indicated that he had purchased a used tire, and of course it had the company's name and phone number on it.
Detective Thompson calls the garage and is able to speak with the mechanic who saw Braden.
I was woke up from the guy that runs the pit stop Conoco that there was a fellow that came in and had a blown out tire.
Reuben Kaufman is a mechanic in Wheatland, Wyoming. He often gets calls for people who have broken down along Interstate 25. But that day, he would unknowingly help a fugitive.
I got the phone call around 5:30, 6 o'clock. His tire blew out at the Bordeaux exit, south of Wheatland, exit 67. He wanted me to run down there and put another tire on it and come back and pick him up and take him back down there.
Reuben drives down the interstate and finds Braden's car on the side of the road.
The tire had blown out. It was literally shreds. I mean, it looked like it blown out at high speed. There was no fixing it. It was just shredded.
Reuben replaces the blown-out tire, then returns to the pit stop to pick up Braden and bring him back to his car.
He seemed like a nice, clean-cut man. You know, very nice people person.
As the two men make small talk, Braden shares with Reuben information he has kept from everyone else.
I asked him where he was going. He said he was headed for the university in Billings.
Billings, Montana, is 400 miles directly north of Wheatland.
It made sense because that's the route you would take to go to Billings, is Interstate 25.
But according to Braden's parents, their son wasn't planning on going to school, nor does he know anyone in Montana. Nevertheless, they admit that their son has long been obsessed with the state.
Braden was infatuated with Montana, and Billings would have been where he wanted to go. He at one point had checked into finding out more about the game warden system in Montana. He wanted to be outdoors and in nature. That was his goal.
It was kind of an uncanny obsession, but he was real into John Wayne movies. And so I think he just saw Montana as scarcely populated, lots of nature. He could fish, he could hunt, he could do all the things that he loved. And that was the place to do it, I guess.
Slowly, a theory begins to take shape. Braden, running from the law, decides to disappear and start a new life in Montana. When Wyoming authorities examine the area, the theory gains strength.
From where the vehicle was found, along northbound I-25 south of Douglas, at some point on up the road is a truck stop.
You know, it was a very short walk to the rest stop. And with Braden's personality, he could walk up to somebody and strike a conversation in a heartbeat and wouldn't have a problem talking his way for a trip further up the road.
The search for Braden is now broadened to include Montana and beyond.
Well, we did contact the chief of the police department for the university there in Billings, and then we also contacted Billings, Montana City Police Department. We made a poster, we distributed it along that known route. In other words, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and even into Canada.
Detective Thompson is also able to create a more exact picture of Braden's flight out of Kansas.
My belief would be that he just drove through the night on the 15th. From kind of the time frame that Reuben has given me, he had the blown tire approximately 10 miles south of Wheatland. He got back on the road with the vehicle fixed somewhere around 8 o'clock, continued northbound on I-25.
Oddly, Braden then abandons the car less than an hour's drive north of where he got the flat. Shortly after that, the Wyoming Highway Patrol comes across the vehicle.
You know, the frustrating thing there is that, you know, we only missed having some contact with him by an hour, or maybe an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half at the most, between when he left the vehicle and the time that Wyoming trooper stopped to check on it initially.
An hour earlier, and Braden might have been intercepted. Instead, his absence is going on 2 weeks. Disappointingly, the expanded search for Braden does not produce results.
Even though we tried to get information distributed as widely as we could, there was just no further leads and no contact.
Braden has been missing for 6 months. Suddenly, there's movement in the case.
I came in my office one morning and had a voicemail from a woman who works at the Salvation Army in Cheyenne, Wyoming. She told me she was 100% certain that she saw Braden.
Coming up, new hope that Braden is on his way home.
He said it was a long way back to Kansas.
Six months after Braden Fuchsa disappears from his home in Kansas, a missing person poster in Cheyenne, Wyoming generates an exciting tip. Linda Curl works at a Salvation Army soup kitchen, where she sees many down-and-out transients. She is certain that Braden was one of them.
We put bread out for the homeless or the low income or whoever needs it. And this particular day, we'd had a lot of bread. So we told him, take as many as you can use. It wouldn't fit in his pocket, so he was sticking it under his arms and trying to hold 3 or 4 loaves instead of just 1 or 2. And he said it was a long way back to Kansas, so he would take it.
It was kind of exciting to hear. If you had been in the Douglas area or on north past Douglas, you know, that would be your way back.
Convinced this could be more than coincidence, Detective Thompson contacts Braden's parents. The bread story strikes a chord.
My heart just dropped because Braden loved bread. He loves Italian. It was terrible because you try to make the bread and he was stealing it all the time. You know, I mean, he would eat it before we even had it toasted.
The news fills the Fuchsas with fresh hope that Braden is on his way home. But just as quickly as the excitement builds, it begins to dissipate.
Cheyenne police looked at various places where some of their homeless people stay, and obviously watching the Salvation Army, and the Salvation Army employees obviously are now very aware to be on the lookout for him. There was just no further sighting, no further indication that he was there.
Detective Thompson begins to doubt the sighting, as it's based solely on the poster.
She sees a missing person poster for Braden, and she says that is the guy that was in here last week and had lunch. But it can be very difficult for someone to make that identification. This person was in last week, and now I'm seeing the poster this week.
But Linda remains steadfast in her conviction that it was Braden whom she saw.
I was absolutely sure it was the same person that had been here because of his eyes and his smile. He didn't look wore out and tired like a lot of our people do. He had a very nice, bright smile, very pleasant, extremely polite. He didn't look like any of our regular people. He didn't look like a homeless person.
But the trail comes to a grinding halt in Cheyenne. In the coming weeks and then months, there are no more sightings of Braden. As time goes by, Braden's loved ones begin to consider a darker theory.
Initially, I wanted to think that he just needed to get out of town for a little while, gather his thoughts, and needed some space. But the more time that went by and no one had heard from him, I was worried he may have ended his life. My biggest fear is that he just couldn't cope with all of the stresses that he had and needed a way out, and that was his way out.
For Detective Thompson, the idea that Braden wanted to end his life is just one more theory that doesn't add up.
We still don't know what his main motivation was for fleeing. But if your objective is to harm yourself, you certainly don't have to drive 10 hours to do that.